December 17, 1944, Ardennes Forest. A gray winter fog clung to the trees, thick enough to muffle sound and blur the line between friend and enemy. Frost crackled beneath every bootstep, and the faint smell of exhaust drifted across the narrow forest road. A small American scout team stood watch at a checkpoint. A simple wooden barrier, a map board, and a radio humming in the cold morning air. From the distance came the low growl of an approaching jeep. Its silhouette formed slowly through the haze. 4 men in U.S. uniforms, helmets low, scarves covering part of their faces. They carried the right gear. Their vehicle bore the right markings. Nothing outward appeared amiss, but something felt off. As the jeep rolled closer, one of the scouts stepped forward, studying the men not as comrades, but as possibilities. Their posture was stiff. Their voices, muted by the engine, carried an unfamiliar cadence. The scout narrowed his eyes. Then, casually, almost like a joke among friends, he called out a phrase every American GI would know without hesitation. What happened next, the hesitation, the flicker of confusion, the subtle panic, confirmed what the fog had tried to hide. This was not a U.S. patrol. It was the enemy, wearing their clothes. And the moment of truth had just begun to unfold. The events that unfolded on that frozen Ardennes road were not isolated misjudgments or the luck of a single patrol. They were part of a much larger story, one that began months earlier inside a German command structure desperate to alter the trajectory of a collapsing war. By late 1944, the strategic picture for Hitler's Germany had become bleak. The Wehrmacht had been forced back across France after the Normandy breakout. The Eastern Front was deteriorating under relentless Soviet pressure. German industry struggled to replenish losses. And the Allies, advancing on 2 fronts, were closing in on the heart of the Reich. It was in this strategic crisis that Adolf Hitler conceived the Ardennes offensive. The plan, formulated in October 1944, aimed to strike through the thinly held American sector in Belgium and Luxembourg, split the British and American armies, and seize the critical port of Antwerp. Hitler believed a decisive blow might fracture the Allied coalition and force negotiations. The German High Command, however, understood the risks. Fuel shortages, depleted divisions, and overstretched logistics made the offensive perilous. Yet the order was given. At the center of this gamble stood an unconventional idea: deception from within the American lines. Hitler assigned the task to a man whose reputation had grown dramatically after the rescue of Mussolini in 1943, SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny. Known for daring special operations, Skorzeny was charged with forming a unit capable of infiltrating American positions, creating confusion, misdirecting traffic, cutting communication, and seizing key bridges ahead of the main German advance. The operation was named Operation Greif. Skorzeny's role was complex from the beginning. His concept required English-speaking German soldiers, American uniforms, captured vehicles, and intimate knowledge of Allied procedures. But despite the prestige of his new brigade, the recruits that arrived were far from ideal. Of the roughly 2,500 men assigned to his unit, only a few dozen could speak English fluently. Many others could only manage fragments or carried accents that would immediately raise suspicion. Nevertheless, Skorzeny continued assembling his force, known as Panzer Brigade 150. Uniforms and vehicles proved even more challenging. While German capture teams had obtained some American equipment during battles in France, it was nowhere near enough. Skorzeny's engineers were forced to modify German vehicles, Panthers, and trucks to resemble U.S. Shermans or M8 Greyhound armored cars from a distance. Close inspection, however, would expose these imitations instantly. Still, Hitler pushed the operation forward. The deception units would operate behind U.S. lines disguised as American MPs, engineers, and reconnaissance teams. Their goal was to fracture the enemy's sense of security, misdirect reinforcements, and delay the Allied response. Even small disruptions at key roadways could give the main German assault much-needed momentum. Yet American forces in the Ardennes, despite being thinly distributed, were not entirely complacent. Though many units believed the sector quiet, a combination of combat experience, regional familiarity, and acute human intuition made some soldiers wary of unexpected movements in the dense winter fog. The terrain itself added to the tension. Narrow roads, forests, and low visibility created an environment where patrols often relied more on instinct than maps. And while Skorzeny's infiltrators prepared to blend in among the Americans, the U.S. Army was quietly developing countermeasures of its own, an evolving system of authentication that depended not on passwords alone, but on slang, cultural references, and everyday American expressions that only native speakers could convincingly master. This convergence of German desperation and American vigilance would soon collide on the snowy roads of the Ardennes, setting the stage for encounters that became some of the most unusual and tense moments of the entire war. As winter deepened across the Ardennes, the American front appeared deceptively quiet. Many Allied commanders believed the Germans were no longer capable of launching a major offensive. Newly arrived divisions rotated into what was considered a rest sector, unaware that the forest around them concealed one of the boldest deception operations of the war. Meanwhile, German preparations for Operation Greif continued under immense pressure. Inside Panzer Brigade 150, Skorzeny struggled with problems that only grew more apparent as the start date approached. Authentic American uniforms were scarce. Captured ones varied in condition and insignia, and many could be identified as mismatched. German soldiers wearing these garments faced a severe penalty if caught, execution as spies under the Geneva Convention. But the stakes of the mission and Hitler's expectations little room for hesitation. Training began in earnest. German troops practiced salutations, drill movements, slang, and even casual body language. They learned how American soldiers held their rifles, how they slung their packs, how they leaned when they walked. But the challenge of language remained overwhelming. Fluency mattered less than instinct, and instinct could not be taught in a few short weeks. Soldiers capable of fully blending in were rare, and Skorzeny knew the success of his operation depended on how convincing they appeared under pressure. The Americans, for their part, noticed an unusual tension spreading among their lines almost as soon as the Ardennes offensive began on December 16, 1944. Reports filtered in of strange behavior at roadblocks, vehicles that claimed the wrong unit designation, men who pronounced place names incorrectly, jeeps heading down the wrong road entirely. At first, these incidents were dismissed as confusion from the sudden German assault. But soon, the stories grew stranger. A squad of American MPs stopped a jeep at a crossroads. The occupants wore U.S. uniforms, but hesitated when asked about a baseball team. Another group misidentified the capital of Illinois. Still another could not name the color of the traffic light that means go in America, an everyday fact no American GI would ever answer incorrectly. These moments sparked new levels of suspicion. Orders spread quickly. Check everyone, even those who looked unquestionably American. MPs began asking spontaneous questions that no non-native speaker could reliably answer. Questions rooted not in military knowledge, but in culture, humor, and regional familiarity. Some asked for details of a popular song. Others demanded that soldiers recite the names of U.S. presidents, state capitals, baseball teams, or the street layout of Philadelphia or Chicago. A few MPs joked that they stopped more Americans than Germans, but the results were unmistakable. A growing number of infiltrators gave themselves away with a pause, a mispronunciation, or an uncertain glance. As suspicions increased, checkpoints multiplied. Units that once traveled freely now faced intense scrutiny at every junction. And with every test, every accidental reveal, the Germans behind American lines grew more anxious. Captured reports later confirmed the tension infiltrators felt. Many were terrified of making a linguistic mistake. Others feared being questioned at all. and the modified German vehicles disguised as American ones drew suspicion easily. Their silhouettes, closer inspection revealed, were unmistakably wrong. The Americans quickly realized that what they were encountering was not confusion. It was infiltration. This growing awareness changed the American posture entirely. Commanders tightened security. Eisenhower himself was placed under temporary isolation for fear of German assassination attempts. Roadblocks spread across France and Belgium. Every jeep, every file of marching soldiers, every convoy became a potential threat. Thus, the stage was set. German infiltrators who had prepared for weeks, believing they could slip unnoticed behind enemy lines, now found themselves trapped in a web of American scrutiny, far sharper than they expected. And soon, one simple phrase. For many, even fluent English speakers, the psychological burden eclipsed the mission itself. German training camps attempted to teach American slang, marching posture, and small talk habits. Soldiers practiced phrases like howdy or what's cooking, but their accents betrayed them. Some tried to memorize baseball scores or the names of American film stars, yet under pressure, even simple questions became traps. Many infiltrators described the same fear, that their disguise would unravel over something trivial, a mispronounced town name, an uncertain answer about a U.S. state capital, a hesitation when asked who pitched for the Yankees. What made the deception so psychologically intense was its unpredictability. There was no rule book for what Americans might ask. Tension grew as the operation unfolded. German soldiers driving disguised jeeps reported racing heartbeats at every checkpoint, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Some even begged their comrades to answer questions for them. One wrong syllable, one unfamiliar idiom could mean arrest or death. These human struggles set the emotional backdrop for the dramatic confrontations that would soon occur, including the moment when one American scout spoke a simple phrase and shattered the illusion entirely. Even before all infiltrators reached their positions, American counterintelligence instincts were already sharpening. The opening hours of the German offensive created disarray. Roads clogged with retreating units, radios filled with conflicting messages. But within this chaos, U.S. MPs and frontline troops began noticing subtle irregularities that didn't match normal battlefield confusion. American personnel had long relied on visual checks at roadblocks, uniforms, vehicle markings, passwords. But once suspicious encounters multiplied, MPs expanded their methods dramatically. Passwords alone were no longer trusted. Infiltrators could overhear or extract them. Instead, MPs turned to cultural and experiential authenticity as their weapon. At roadblocks across Belgium, MPs started asking impromptu questions tailored to reveal native familiarity. Who won the World Series? What's the capital of Michigan? Name a street in Chicago. What do you call a traffic light that means go? These were not standardized challenges. Each soldier invented his own, making them impossible for German infiltrators to prepare for in training. These spontaneous interrogations exposed dozens of disguised Germans. Many hesitated. Some mispronounced common terms. Others over-explained answers in ways American soldiers found suspicious. Each mistake tightened American defenses further. The U.S. response escalated quickly. Eisenhower's headquarters ordered checkpoints everywhere. Phone instructions changed daily. Officers traveling by vehicle required written certification. The Army effectively transformed the Ardennes into a network of microfronts, each with its own vigilant gatekeepers. American counterintelligence didn't merely react. It evolved faster than the infiltration teams could adapt. And as U.S. procedures hardened, German confidence broke down. The next angle reveals how leadership on both sides shaped the flow of this covert struggle. Operation Greif navigated a precarious moral and legal boundary. Under international law, particularly the 1907 Hague Regulations, combatants who fought in enemy uniforms without revealing their true identity risked classification as spies, punishable by execution upon capture.
Skorzeny briefed his men about this risk, and many entered the mission fully aware that their disguise put them beyond the protections normally afforded to soldiers. For the Germans, the moral tension lay in necessity. Hitler demanded unconventional tactics to break Allied cohesion, and Skorzeny's men believed their actions might help shorten the war. Yet the infiltrators wrestled with the knowledge that, if caught, they would stand no chance of being treated as prisoners of war. Some carried both American and German uniforms, hoping to switch back at the last possible moment if fighting broke out. On the American side, moral clarity grew as evidence of infiltration spread. Captured infiltrators were interrogated harshly. Courts-martials were convened rapidly. Sentences, including executions, were carried out within days, reflecting the grave threat these disguised soldiers posed. The moral dimension added a human weight to every encounter. Each question asked at a checkpoint, each moment of hesitation carried life and death consequences. Operation Greif blurred the boundary between legitimate military deception and acts punishable even in wartime. This moral tension fueled the dramatic confrontations that would culminate in the operation's turning point, encounters where a single phrase could determine a soldier's fate. The fog had barely lifted on December 17th when one of the most defining encounters of Operation Greif unfolded on a narrow Ardennes road. The American scouts at the checkpoint had been on edge since dawn. Reports of infiltrators had begun trickling in from nearby positions. Strange accents, wrong unit numbers, vehicles heading in the wrong direction. Every new rumor sharpened their senses. The jeep approached slowly, its engine humming through the cold. 4 men sat inside, all wearing American uniforms, helmets secured, scarves pulled high against the chill. Nothing on the surface appeared wrong. Their vehicle bore U.S. markings. The driver gripped the wheel with a familiarity that could easily pass for genuine. Yet the scouts noticed subtle inconsistencies. The way the men avoided eye contact, the stiffness of their posture, the absence of casual chatter typical among American patrols moving between positions. One scout, a sergeant from the 99th Infantry Division, stepped forward to signal the jeep to halt. He had spent months on the Western Front and knew the rhythm of American speech as instinctively as breathing. The men in the jeep greeted him with words that sounded correct but clipped, as if rehearsed. Their tone lacked the easy cadence of soldiers accustomed to banter under tension. The sergeant asked for their unit designation. The answer came quickly, too quickly, like information memorized from a list. He asked where they were headed. Another rapid reply, but with a slight mispronunciation of a nearby town. The scouts exchanged glances. Suspicion tightened. To test them further, the sergeant posed a question designed to reveal familiarity rather than knowledge. "Who's your favorite pitcher this season?" A harmless question, a casual soldier's joke, not something that could be prepared for in training camps deep inside Germany. The men in the jeep froze. It was subtle, just a fraction of a second. But in the compressed tension of a wartime checkpoint, even a heartbeat's hesitation carried meaning. The driver glanced sideways at the man beside him, searching for an answer. The others remained silent. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Still, he said nothing. Instead, he took a single step closer. His expression relaxed slightly, as if preparing to ease the tension. And then he spoke the phrase, the simple, unmistakably American expression that every GI recognized without thinking, but no German had instinctively mastered. "Say, what's the score today?" Another pause, a fatal one. The men in the jeep exchanged uncertain glances. One muttered a number that made no sense. Another attempted to deflect the question entirely. Their voices faltered. At that moment, the deception collapsed. The scouts reacted instantly, rifles raised. Their training took over, and they ordered the men out of the jeep. The infiltrators hesitated, realizing the consequences of exposure. Their disguise, carefully assembled uniforms, memorized unit numbers, even their false vehicle, had fallen apart because of a phrase as ordinary as a conversation between friends back home. The infiltrators were disarmed, searched, and placed under guard. Additional units were summoned to escort them to division headquarters. As they were led away, their earlier confidence had evaporated. Their faces reflected the growing panic rippling through Skorzeny's deception units. Fear of discovery, fear of execution, fear of a mission unraveling faster than they could adapt. Word spread quickly across American positions. Reports of disguised Germans being captured confirmed what MPs and scouts had suspected. Checkpoints doubled in number. Traffic slowed to a crawl as every passing soldier was scrutinized. What had begun as a deliberate German attempt to sow confusion was now backfiring, even more scrutiny and cohesion among the Americans. This single confrontation, one jeep at one checkpoint, became emblematic of a much larger shift. American soldiers, relying on intuition, experience, and the cultural fluency of everyday language, demonstrated that even the most carefully crafted disguise could be undone by a simple phrase spoken with confidence. And for the Germans behind the lines, this realization marked a turning point from bold infiltration to mounting panic. The capture of the disguised patrol was not an isolated breakthrough. It was the spark that ignited a chain reaction across the entire American front. Within hours, similar encounters were being reported from units all along the Ardennes. What Skorzeny hoped would be a quiet infiltration had instead become a storm of suspicion and tightened security. The Americans, realizing the scale of the deception, adapted with remarkable speed. By midday on December 17th, roadblocks appeared on almost every major route. Soldiers who previously waved familiar faces through now stopped every vehicle. Officers, enlisted men, medics, truck
German infiltrators who had slipped past earlier in the day suddenly found themselves trapped in a tightening net. Many attempted to reverse direction or reroute through forest roads, but this only drew more attention. Some abandoned their missions entirely, discarding captured uniforms in the woods as they tried to return to German lines. A few panicked and confessed when confronted, hoping for leniency. Their words revealed valuable intelligence, the presence of more disguised Germans, their missions, the positions of modified vehicles, even the involvement of Skorzeny himself. At the American divisional headquarters, reports multiplied rapidly. Officers recognized they were facing not random saboteurs, but a coordinated attempt to penetrate and disrupt the Allied response to the German offensive. This realization triggered one of the most dramatic decisions of the campaign. General Eisenhower, the supreme commander, was placed under heightened protection and temporarily restricted from travel. Rumors circulated that German infiltrators intended to assassinate him or seize key bridges before Allied reinforcements could move. The psychological impact on the American command structure was complex. Some officers grew tense, knowing that their uniforms alone no longer guaranteed trust. Others embraced the heightened alertness, recognizing that vigilance had become a decisive advantage. Communication centers repeated updated authentication codes throughout the day. Units were instructed to use call and response procedures in the field. Soldiers who had never expected to question their comrades now studied accents, slang, and regional speech patterns with careful attention. Meanwhile, on the German side, panic began to spread through Panzer Brigade 150. Infiltrators reported near misses, heightened American suspicion, and failed attempts to redirect traffic or sabotage communications. The disguise-trained teams soon discovered they could not move freely enough to complete their missions. Their vehicles, especially the modified Panthers, were too conspicuous. The lack of fluent English speakers made improvisation impossible. Worse, the knowledge that captured infiltrators might face execution created a state of constant dread. Skorzeny himself recognized the deteriorating situation. His reports to higher command began shifting in tone, emphasizing obstacles instead of opportunities. The Americans were not behaving as expected. Instead of confusion, they displayed cohesion. Instead of vulnerability, they demonstrated adaptability. And instead of being misled, they were actively hunting infiltrators with increasing success. By December 18th, the infiltration phase of Operation Greif was effectively compromised. Many teams were captured, others abandoned their missions. The hoped-for chaos in American traffic routes never materialized. Bridges remained in Allied control. Communications were disrupted only briefly, if at all. U.S. movements continued with surprising efficiency despite the German offensive. The turning point had arrived with startling clarity. American soldiers had transformed a German deception effort into a catalyst for unity, vigilance, and operational focus. The very tactic meant to fracture American lines instead strengthened them. Skorzeny's daring plan, built on secrecy, deception, and linguistic precision, had been undone not by overwhelming firepower or complex counterintelligence systems, but by the intuitive, cultural awareness of ordinary American soldiers. Across the Ardennes, the momentum now shifted. The Americans were no longer merely defending, they were preparing to respond. And the collapse of the infiltration effort set the stage for the broader consequences that would define the remainder of the battle. The unraveling of Operation Greif became apparent long before the wider German offensive reached its turning point. By December 19, 1944, American units across the Ardennes had captured enough infiltrators to understand the full scope of Skorzeny's deception. Prisoners revealed the structure of Panzer Brigade 150, the objectives of the disguised teams, and even the shortages of genuine American equipment. What had once seemed like a clever and potentially devastating strategy was now a compromised operation struggling against a wall of growing American awareness. Interrogation reports painted a consistent picture. Many captured infiltrators confessed how ill-prepared they felt once behind American lines. They described the overwhelming fear of being questioned, the strain of speaking English under pressure, and the constant risk of exposure through trivial details they had never considered. One prisoner admitted that he had spent only 10 days learning American slang. Another described memorizing baseball teams without understanding their significance. These testimonies offered American commanders a clear view into the weaknesses of the German plan. American forces immediately adjusted their defensive posture. The U.S. First Army, recognizing the threat posed by disguised infiltrators, tightened internal security across every sector. Divisions were instructed to verify every movement order, reassess traffic flows, and increase communication discipline. Roadblocks grew tenfold, patrols began overlapping. Even rear area troops, clerks, mechanics, cooks were assigned checkpoint duties. The Americans turned a sprawling front into a network of fortified intersections and controlled access points. The effect on German operations was devastating. Infiltrators who might have contributed to delay or disruption instead found themselves unable to carry out even basic tasks. Their inability to redirect traffic or sabotage communications meant the main German assault advanced without the confusion it had been designed to exploit. American divisions moved reinforcements into threatened areas faster than Hitler's planners had anticipated. Bridges remained in Allied hands, enabling armored units to reposition rapidly. The tightening American response also impacted morale on both sides. American soldiers became more confident as they captured infiltrators, proving their instincts correct. Each successful interception reinforced the belief that the German plan was failing. Soldiers at roadblocks joked about the increasingly creative questions they used, even as they treated each encounter with seriousness. Meanwhile, German infiltrators reported feeling trapped, hunted, and overwhelmed by the unexpected adaptability of their enemy. This strain extended from the infiltrators to the German leadership. Skorzeny's situation reports grew increasingly pessimistic. By December 20, he informed higher command that his brigade could not execute its intended objectives. The Americans were too alert. Checkpoints were everywhere. Movement was nearly impossible without detection. What was supposed to be a fluid deception had become a liability. Documented outcomes reflected the failure clearly. Approximately 44 German infiltrators were captured during the operation, many within the first 48 hours. Several were tried by military courts and executed under wartime regulations for fighting in enemy uniforms. Others provided intelligence that helped the Americans fine-tune their defensive measures. The infiltration plan, once considered a daring stroke, had ultimately contributed more to Allied readiness than German success. The collapse of Operation Greif had strategic consequences. It denied the German offensive the opportunity to fracture the American response. Instead of confusion, the operation created caution. Instead of buying time for German armor, it motivated the Americans to accelerate their deployments. And instead of eroding morale, it unified American units under a shared purpose: identify, resist, and eliminate disguised infiltrators. The aftermath of these encounters set the stage for the broader turning point that would soon unfold across the Ardennes, as American forces regained confidence and momentum. By the final week of December 1944, the effects of Operation Greif's collapse reverberated far beyond the small teams of infiltrators who had attempted to slip through American lines. What began as a covert effort to destabilize the Allied response had instead solidified American resolve and exposed the vulnerabilities of German strategy during the Ardennes offensive. The immediate consequence was the tightening of Allied command security. For several days, rumors circulated that German infiltrators intended to assassinate Eisenhower or seize critical junctions. Although intelligence later confirmed these fears were exaggerated, the precautions taken had a real impact. Senior command posts fortified their perimeters. Travel orders were heavily restricted. High-ranking officers avoided unnecessary movements. The Germans hoped to create confusion. Instead, they triggered a defensive shell that reinforced the Allied leadership structure at a critical moment. On the front lines, the morale and psychological shift was even more pronounced. American soldiers, initially caught off guard by the surprise German offensive, quickly adapted to the threat of disguised enemies. Units that had been retreating or regrouping became more vigilant, disciplined, and cohesive. Roadblocks acted as anchor points in a fluid battlefield, giving commanders better control of troop movements and supply routes. This increased cohesion allowed the Americans to recover quickly from the initial German breakthrough. Strategically, the failure of Operation Greif deprived Hitler's plan of one of its central advantages: disruption.
The failure of the infiltration effort became emblematic of the larger strategic failure of the Ardennes offensive. Daring concepts undone by inadequate resources, unrealistic expectations, and the unexpected resilience of American forces. Post-war assessments from both sides agreed on one point: German brilliance in planning could not compensate for the operational realities they faced. Operation Greif had shown the theoretical power of deception, but also its limits in a modern, highly mobile war. American vigilance, cultural familiarity, and adaptive command structures proved more powerful than any disguise. And, as historians later reflected, it was often the smallest details, a phrase, an accent, a hesitation, that determined the fate of an infiltrator and shaped the decisions of the battlefield around him. Those moments of exposure left a lasting imprint on the memory of the Ardennes campaign. The stage was now set for a broader reflection on what this episode meant for warfare, identity, and human intuition in the chaos of battle. The story of Operation Greif and the disguised German infiltrators who attempted to alter the course of the Ardennes offensive offers a quiet but enduring lesson about the nature of war. Though overshadowed by massive tank battles, frozen infantry lines, and the sweeping counteroffensive that followed, the encounters between disguised Germans and vigilant American soldiers revealed a deeper truth about the battlefield. Sometimes, the smallest human details shape the fate of armies. Infiltration on paper is a weapon of precision, built on secrecy, daring, and the expectation that an enemy can be deceived long enough for momentum to shift. Yet the failure of Operation Greif showed that deception falters when it confronts the lived experience of those who truly belong to a culture, a language, a way of life. No uniform could replicate instinct. No memorized phrase could match the natural cadence of a native speaker. And no amount of German planning could anticipate the power of an offhand question spoken by a soldier who simply trusted his intuition. For the Americans, the episode became a reminder that vigilance is not merely a military function, it is a human one. The scouts and MPs who exposed infiltrators did so not through complex intelligence systems, but through observation, personality, and the cultural awareness that grows from everyday life. Their actions reinforced the resilience of frontline troops and helped stabilize a battlefield shaken by one of the largest German offensives of the war. For the Germans, Operation Greif highlighted the limits of unconventional tactics when stretched beyond capability. It demonstrated that courage alone cannot overcome shortages of language, equipment, or cohesion. And it underscored the risks that soldiers must bear when deception pushes them outside the protections of established wartime conduct. In the broader history of World War II, this episode stands as a testament to the unpredictable interplay between planning and reality. Wars are shaped not only by strategic vision and battlefield might, but also by human awareness, by the simple ability to recognize what feels right and what does not. And in the Ardennes, on a fog-covered road, a single phrase spoken without hesitation proved stronger than the most elaborate disguise.